The laughter that filled the restaurant that afternoon wasn't the kind that warmed the heart. It was sharp, cruel, the kind that made walls echo with mockery instead of joy. Sunlight streamed through tall glass windows, bouncing off polished cutlery and sparkling glasses. The air smelled of roasted herbs and butter, of money and elegance. But in the far corner, where shadows softened the brightness, sat a man who felt smaller than the world around him. His name was Marcus Hale, a janitor, a man whose life had been reduced to long nights and early mornings, sweeping floors that weren't his, polishing doors that never opened for him. His hands carried calluses, his shirt bore faded creases, and his eyes held the weight of years lived in silence. To the executives of Preston and Cole Industries, Marcus was invisible. Just another uniform, blending into the marble floors he scrubbed. They never cared that he once dreamed of becoming an engineer, that he once drew blueprints by candlelight, or that he once believed life would offer him more than mops and buckets. Life had beaten those dreams out of him. His father's sudden death, bills he couldn't pay, a family to feed, and in the end he had settled for survival. What Marcus didn't know as he sat quietly at his table was that he had been chosen, not for kindness, not for recognition, but for humiliation. A prank had been set in motion, carefully crafted by men with expensive watches and empty hearts. They told Marcus he had a blind date. They told him someone had been watching him from afar, admiring his kind eyes and his steady hands. Marcus resisted at first. He looked in the mirror every morning and saw a man the world passed by. His reflection showed tired lines, work-worn skin, and the quiet ache of loneliness. But then came the whisper of hope, the fragile thought that maybe, after all these years, someone had noticed him. Someone had seen more than his uniform, and so he said yes. That Friday, Marcus prepared like it was the most important day of his life. He pressed his best shirt, the one he usually saved for church. He polished his shoes until they shone, even though the leather was worn thin. And on his wrist, he fastened the only thing of value he owned, his father's old watch. When he stepped into the restaurant, his heart raced. The chandeliers glowed softly above. The waiters moved like dancers, balancing trays of wine. And across the room, at a corner table, Marcus sat nervously, waiting for a woman he had never met. At another table, a group of junior managers sat with smug smiles, their phones ready to record. They whispered and chuckled, waiting for the moment when Marcus would realize he had been fooled. But fate had written a different story. The door opened, and in walked Evelyn Carrington. Not just any woman. She was the CEO of Preston and Cole, the very company Marcus cleaned every night. She was elegance without arrogance. Her navy blue dress was simple yet commanding. Her posture straight, her presence impossible to ignore. Marcus froze. Surely this was a mistake. Surely she wasn't here for him. But Evelyn walked past the stairs, past the whispers, and stopped right at his table. The room hushed. The laughter that had once roared now faltered into silence. What Marcus didn't know was that Evelyn had overheard the cruel prank. She had seen the smirks of her managers and heard their plan. And in that instant, something inside her stirred. She remembered her own mother, a housekeeper who worked until her hands cracked, who was laughed at, dismissed, unseen. Evelyn had promised herself, long ago, that she would never let another person be treated as less than human in her presence. So she sat down. "Marcus," she said softly, "thank you for waiting. I'm sorry I'm late." He stammered, confused. You're here, for me?" Evelyn smiled. Not the polished smile of a CEO closing a deal, but a smile warm enough to disarm the walls Marcus had built around his heart. "Yes," she replied. "For you." At the back of the room, the managers stiffened. Their phones lowered. Their laughter died in their throats. The world seemed to shift in that moment. Evelyn began to speak, not about stock prices, not about business meetings, but about life, about respect, about dignity, about how society measured people by titles, forgetting the quiet ones who kept the world running. She told Marcus she admired his strength, the courage it took to keep showing up, even when life had been unkind. She spoke of her mother's struggle, how she too had once been invisible, and how Evelyn had sworn never to let kindness go unnoticed. Marcus sat stunned. For years he had lived in silence, enduring whispers, enduring loneliness. To hear someone of such power look into his eyes and say he mattered, it broke something inside him. Tears filled his eyes, unashamed. For the first time in decades he felt seen, and the entire restaurant saw it too. The junior managers who had planned the prank shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their arrogance melted into shame as the mirror of truth was held up before them. The joke had backfired. What was meant to humiliate Marcus had revealed their own cruelty instead. Around the room, silence hung heavy. Some diners lowered their eyes. Others leaned in, listening to every word Evelyn said. By the time the plates were cleared, no one in that restaurant would forget what they had witnessed. Marcus walked out that day with more than a memory. He walked out with his dignity restored, with the knowledge that he was more than his uniform, more than the whispers, more than the loneliness that had defined him. And Evelyn, she had done more than defend a janitor. She had reminded an entire room that humanity is not measured by wealth, but by heart. When Marcus returned to work on Monday, things were different. The story had spread like wildfire. From whispers in hallways to conversations in the break room, everyone knew how the CEO had stood up for the janitor. People greeted Marcus with nods of respect, some with apologies, some with gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of belonging. The managers who had plotted the prank, they never laughed about it again. In fact, some of them couldn't even look Marcus in the eye. But Marcus wasn't bitter. He carried himself with quiet pride, knowing that kindness had triumphed over cruelty. And Evelyn, she never forgot that afternoon either. She carried the memory as a reminder that leadership wasn't about titles or power. It was about humanity. The prank that was meant to destroy Marcus had instead transformed him. It became the turning point of his life, the story of his dignity reborn. And for everyone who witnessed it, it became a timeless reminder. The worth of a person is never determined by their job, their clothes, or their status, but by the strength of their soul and the kindness of those who choose to see it. If this story touched your heart, take a moment now, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Talismanania. Because stories like this are not just tales. They are lifelines, proof that compassion still has a place in this world. And before we end, I have one request. In the comments, share a moment when someone's kindness reminded you that humanity still has a heart. Your words might be the encouragement another viewer desperately needs. Marcus never forgot that afternoon, and neither did Evelyn. Because in a world often clouded by cruelty, kindness will always shine the brightest.